Welcome to the Protestants and Politics Podcast. I'm your host, Nap Nasworth. I've been exploring the intersection of churches, Christians, theology, and public life for over 20 years, as both a professor and a journalist. But I still have lots of questions. I invite you to continue learning with me as I interview interesting voices in this field.
It's hard to explain or describe, but I feel like I speak on behalf of many evangelical women who are honest about it. It was a betrayal. It was the ultimate betrayal. That these are the very men, many of them, who were defending that type of banter as locker room talk, that have devoted years in ministry to exhorting men to love their wives as Christ loved the church, to respect women, to cherish women, to be chivalrous in the home, and to then turn around and say something that trite was again a waking up for me that something is not adding up here.
How should Christians respond to the misogynist in the White House? Why do some Christians defend President Donald Trump's objectification of women? This was a major issue in the 2016 election and has come up again in this year's election. Trump won 61% of white non-college educated women when he ran against Hillary Clinton. But polling this year has shown a major erosion in his support among this group. In response, Trump has been tweeting appeals to, quote, the suburban housewives of America. That sounds like the name of a reality TV show, doesn't it, from our reality TV president? My guest to talk about this is best-selling author and women's ministry leader, Vicki Courtney. She has authored many books and devotionals, including 5 Conversations You Must Have with Your Daughter and 5 Conversations You Must Have with Your Son. 2 of her books won Evangelical Christian Publishers Association awards, and she has appeared on CNN and Fox News as a youth culture commentator. In 2016, she wrote a book for teen girls, which is related to our topic today, titled Reflect, Discovering the Beauty, Worth, and Wonderfulness of You. She also contributed a chapter for The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump, 30 Evangelical Christians on Justice, Truth, and Moral Integrity. The name of her chapter was Donald Trump's Low View of Women, Silence is Not an Option, which was, and that book was published on June 1st, and I also have a chapter in that book. 2 weeks ago, she delivered a speech at the Convention on Founding Principles. This was a group of conservatives and moderates that were offering an alternative to the Republican convention that was happening that same week. And I'll put links to Vicki Courtney's website and to that speech in the podcast description. Vicki Courtney, welcome to the Protestants and Politics Podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right, so before we get to Trump, just to sort of set this up, take me back to 2016. You had published this book for teen girls that I'd mentioned in the introduction, and you were also involved in conferences and things like that with a special focus on teen girls. So what was the concern you had at that time that you were trying to address, and what was the main point you wanted to get across?
Sure. So in my ministry, and I've been in ministry since, officially 1998, I held an event for college women in Austin, Texas, and about 500 women plus showed up that very first year. And that led to more events for college women, eventually events for teenage girls, even middle school girls, some mother-daughter events along the way. And while I no longer do those events, I'm a grandmother now, so they typically don't want to hear from Mimi, standing up there on the stage. But one of just the main messages or the themes, if you will, to most of my writing and my speaking to young women, even to adult women, would be on the subject of worth, and I call on them to reject the world's shallow equations for worth. Worth equals what you look like, or worth equals what you do, or worth equals what other people think, that this tends to be how we define our worth, women especially. Um, and we see societal media pressures on women to basically, support that. And so I've spent, two decades really trying to be that cheerleader to young women, to adult women, that we have a better standard. And it's, of course, God's standard for worth, that we view ourselves as made in the very image of God. And so fast forward to 2016, and after years spent rallying that message, we end up with Donald Trump on the ticket. And I have, as a background, always up until that point, voted Republican. And as soon as I was made aware of, well, it's like, which one do we even pick now? There's so many comments that were public knowledge that could be, traced back to things he said in interviews or in writing, um, where he had a clear, just very low view of women. And then so already I'd made up my mind that this is just so disturbing that we would even be entertaining voting for someone like this. And then add to the heap of all that, the racism, the xenophobia. It's just deal breaker for me. And of course, in the Access Hollywood hot mic moment when that leaked, I really felt like that was going to be the moment when evangelicals withdrew support. I was sure of it. Absolutely. How could they, with something that solid right there, um, tout this message of respect for women and chivalry and all that, and then turn around and vote for a man like this with a track record like this? And of course, as you and I know, I was wrong. Not only did that not happen, they, as you mentioned, showed up in quite a majority voting for him. And, I have friends. I have friends that cast a vote in that direction, and they boiled it down to, I'm voting for platform over person. You hear the lines, I'm not, we can't expect the president to be a pastor in chief, and all these lines that we hear. However, I felt it was important enough to take a stand and ended up voting third party or a write-in candidate in 16, um, because I felt it would be hypocritical for me, after writing and speaking on this topic for so many years and believing it wholeheartedly for myself as well as all other women, to then turn around and give, a pass to someone who is guilty on so many fronts of just having a very, very low view of women. And then you add to that the dozen or more uh, accusations of sexual assault. It was, just too much.
And what was the reaction from your evangelical friends when you came out against Trump?
It wasn't good. I'll tell you that much. Um, I posted a blog post um, explaining in so many words what I just shared, that I just couldn't, in good conscience, support this candidate for these reasons. And I did have some who agreed with me and felt the same way, but I did get a lot of pushback. I had, a lot coming on saying we have two choices on this ballot. If you don't vote for him, then you're voting for abortion. The lesser of two evils argument was used quite often. I think one of the most offensive comments I heard from a woman was a woman who contacted me after I released the blog post and said, "I have experienced sexual abuse myself, so I'm very sensitive to this topic. And while it's very disappointing that the president or the nominee has been accused of this, I've decided I need to take one for the team."
Hmm.
And that's when I thought, you know what, I don't think I'm a good fit for this team anymore. If this is what it boils down to. So, I don't understand why we would have to even come to that conclusion. And obviously I couldn't. And so, yeah, in answer, not a great response. I took a hit with, of course, suffered getting unfriended and unfollowed by some, but people have short memories with things like that. And I didn't typically talk a lot about politics much after he was elected until probably a couple of years ago. And it's not often. It's usually, something that's pretty grievous where, like standing in front of a church and holding a Bible above your head upside down and that sort of thing. And I'll post something and I'll take the hits again and get unfollowed by a couple hundred people in an hour. And then the dust settles again. And so that's pretty much what it's looked like for the last couple of years. Or I've posted about the refugee ceiling, the numbers being dropped under his administration. I volunteer with Refugee Services of Texas, and this is one good thing I will tell you that has happened as a result of 2016. Is it was a wake up call for me personally. It really caused me to examine some faulty belief systems or structures uh, that I had in place in my own life, where I had just assumed or bought into the formula that good Christians vote this way, or if we want to save the unborn, then we've got to align ourselves with the Republican candidate. And so I began to do my homework and really dig around, for more information on some of these topics. And as I grew more frustrated over things that were being said during the presidency and such, I decided one day I could either be that person that grumbles and complains on the sidelines, or I could step up and be a part of the solution. So a friend of mine recommended that I look into Refugee Services of Texas, and I did a training and I volunteered, and that's just been it's been eye-opening for me to see that there are other issues out there, pro-life issues that have typically been ignored by conservatives for decades. And so I've been detangling, I guess is a good word now, my own personal beliefs, and I've never felt stronger in my faith as far as believing in the gospel and the red letter words of Jesus Christ Himself. And but I'm really at a place in my life where I'm trying to focus my own ministry efforts to look more like the greatest commandment that Jesus talked about, to love the Lord our God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbors ourselves. And I don't know that we're doing a great job of that in the church right now. I think there is a reckoning going on, and so I do feel that some good has come from it. And as far as personal introspection and reevaluating some dangerous, maybe toxic belief structures that were in place prior to the election. But it's been painful all the same. But I guess no pain, no gain, right?
Yeah, so that was actually the last subheading of your chapter from Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump is waking up. That's your last subheading.
Yes.
And you write, I'm just going to read it here. You write, quote, Trump's brash and unashamed objectification of women, coupled with his lack of sorrow and repentance, thrust the issue of objectification into the spotlight, warts and all. The underbelly has been exposed for all to see, and it cannot be unseen. And then later, you also write about how you say, I too am waking up. So you're saying that your involvement there with the refugees is part of that waking up process for you.
Absolutely. Yes. It has, and I've grown particularly close to the Burmese refugee community in Austin, and by default of having signed up to do an airport pickup in February of 2019, I believe it was. And I picked up a family of four from the airport, two little girls. They had two daughters under the age of 4 and didn't speak a word of English. And then my involvement in helping that family throughout the year get established in the city of Austin, apply for Social Security cards, drive the dad to job interviews, apply for food assistance programs and kindergarten programs and such. I've just been made aware of so many other issues that I think we've been insulated from for many, many years, and myself included. And so I realized that I'd been in somewhat of an echo chamber. For even though I've been writing these Christian books, I've been traveling around and speaking at women's conferences, I was guilty as well. That after a while, you grow comfortable with your own people in a sense, and who can reflect back the same beliefs and values. And it's hard to get outside of our comfort zones. And so that's what volunteering did for me, is it nudged me out of my comfort zone. I'm still emerging from that echo chamber of sorts, and learning about so many other, issues out there that need our attention, and even issues that I held different positions on. I'm ashamed to say at times in my life when I was ignorant to what was really going on behind the backdrop. It's easy to say callous things when it comes to immigration and asylum seekers, and not understanding the full extent of the problem, or those who don't have health care, and to imagine that it's by some fault of their own. And so it's been a waking up in many, many areas of my life.
There's another defense of Trump that I want to talk about. So your subheading is "Silence is not an option." So you have a message for those who are just silent about the issue of the objectification of women, and you talked about also the people who are more, we have to vote for Trump because of abortion, and they're pro-life. But there's another group as well who have defended Trump by saying things like, "Well, it's just locker room talk," or "boys will be boys. All guys do this. It's not that big a deal." So what's your response when you hear those sorts of defenses?
I mean, even hearing it now, just hearing you say it just makes my blood boil, because it was really, I believe the locker room talk statement in the immediate aftermath of the leaked, hot mic moment for the Access Hollywood tapes, and an male evangelical leader saying that was, of course, not a turning point because I've already turned, if you will, but that is when it was almost as if it's hard to explain or describe, but I feel like I speak on behalf of many evangelical women who are honest about it. It was a betrayal. It was the ultimate betrayal. That these are the very men, many of them, who were defending that type of banter as locker room talk, that have devoted years in ministry to exhorting men to love their wives as Christ loved the church, to respect women, to cherish women, to be chivalrous in the home, and to then turn around and say something that trite was again a waking up for me that something is not adding up here. So yeah, that was a definite wake up call or moment to me, where I think for me, it was that moment where I realized I will not be silent. I will not take one for the team, whatever that means, right? I will not stand by and say nothing. And I certainly won't buy this one, that it's locker room talk.
Yeah. And one of the things you brought up in your book, or brought up in the chapter. So why is the objectification of women bad for women? And this goes directly to the point of, in our culture, when we do it, when it becomes a cultural value, but also why it's important to have leadership, such as in the White House, that does not objectify women. So just talk for a minute about what it means for women to live in a culture that objectifies them.
Sure. And I shared in that chapter some groundbreaking a groundbreaking study back in 2007 by the American Psychological Association that linked objectification to common mental health problems in women. Everything from disordered eating to self-esteem, body image issues, depression. Another study related the effects of female objectification, and found that women who are objectified are viewed as less than fully human and perceived to have less of a mind for thoughts or decisions, and are viewed as less deserving of moral treatment by others. And so, it's not surprising that many crimes that we see today, such as rape, pornography, sex trafficking, began with objectification, which is why we can't ignore this issue. And we certainly can't minimize it or write it off to locker room talk. And those are these studies that I just, some of the findings that I just shared a minute ago. I've shared those same studies in books I've written to mothers on raising daughters, the 5 conversations you must have with your daughters. I've shared them in the 5 conversations you must have with your sons, because I think it's equally important to educate our young men as to the dangers of objectification and remind them that they are to view women as made in the image of God, likewise to themselves. And so this is nothing new. And I've one of the reasons I feel mothers picked up those books is, these books were coming out in a time where, fashion was, it was, definitely risque, and mothers were frustrated because it was, the clothes are objectifying their daughters, comments were, social media, the pressures were thick. And so there was a lot of support and, really a backlash from the Christian community that we need to reject this. And then in 2016, crickets, right? We can't say anything. Or we're told, well, he's like King Cyrus, or he's not really, we can't expect him to act like a pastor, or, And so again, I say in the book, when I wrote that chapter, I shared that I sincerely was not writing it to influence a vote. I feel like most people have made up their mind at this point. One of the things I wanted to do is make an appeal to those who have come to the conclusion that they will be supporting Trump, that they cannot remain silent about his attitude, comments, behavior towards women. And I would say, in regard to racism, in regard to xenophobia, all those issues, they need to have the courage to say, okay, I feel like I have no other choice but to vote for the platform, but I am sickened and disheartened by what I hear this man say. And he is nothing like the Jesus that we claim to follow in Scripture. Because the next generation is watching and they are listening, and they're already pretty confused, and studies or statistics show that a lot of them are bailing. They're out of here in regard to the faith, because I believe this is a huge issue where they've been taught these things in the home, but then they hear nothing, or they hear, even worse, a defense for a man who has degraded women, long track record of degrading comments and actions.
So one of the things that comes up with regard to white evangelicals' support for Trump is whether they changed to accommodate Trump, or whether Trump revealed something that was already there that was kind of hidden before. And I'm wondering what you think about that with regards to misogyny. Is this something that, were these issues already there within the church, but kind of we didn't see them before, and then Trump revealed them? Or do you think it's more, they're changing to accommodate voting for Trump?
I think it's both, but I do believe that it revealed, and that was part of what I shared in the waking up portion there that I wrote about at the end, that really Trump's hot mic moments, comments about women, and then being elected to the highest office in the land left enough women, I think, feeling out of that, in that sense of betrayal that many of us felt. It ignited the Me Too movement. All of a sudden, this wasn't even really a Christian issue so much as it was women realizing, when, I shared that analogy of the underbelly has been exposed and it cannot be unseen. I think for many of us, it was like, wow, this is truly evil. And we don't have to tolerate this. This is not normal. It doesn't have to be the norm in how men and women treat one another. that women just, we accept that we will always be viewed as objects for the male viewing pleasure, and um, more of a summation of our, body parts. It doesn't have to be that way. That there exists a structure, if we insist on it, where women can be respected as equals in the sense of being, from a Christian standpoint, made in the very image of God and thus deserving of respect and honor and dignity. And so I think it was a waking up for a lot of women who, and I put myself in that category, that maybe I ignored it along the way because I never questioned that it could be different, if that makes sense. And once it was exposed, I really do feel like that is the backlash that we saw that ignited the Me Too movement, that then led to the Church Too movement, that's still reverberating in our faith communities today, um, because women became more sensitized at that point to comments that were objectifying, to actions that were objectifying. I know I did. And we became concerned for our daughters and our granddaughters and the next generation. So I do think that was a lot of it, that for many, it exposed um, a flaw in the system, or I think I compared it to a crack in the foundation of this sort of patriarchal structure that has been in place for a long time. And we hear those words here and there, and but I think it showed the ugliness of it, warts and all, exposed it. And but then I also believe your comment that for many, or for others, it was, wow, more of a frantic fear. I have no choice but to explain this away because I can't imagine voting any other way. So I have to, we call that what? Confirmation bias. I have to look for ways to confirm my own bias to this party, which causes, then all kinds of, I think we see that with those adhering to the conspiracy theories and, anything we can grasp onto to try to confirm what we desperately, I guess, want to believe because it brings us what? Maybe a sense of security. I know I haven't felt real secure myself personally for the past several years. And so I'm not sure that really works at the end of the day.
Yeah, and there's definitely been a lot of turmoil with regard to the Me Too and Church Too movements as well. We've seen a lot of turmoil within the church over issues of race, especially this year. And it's a painful thing to see. But what do you think about the future? Do you think the church would be moving toward a better place as a result of this turmoil and seeing and the pain and everything that this is uncovering?
I do. And maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I saw someone yesterday on my Facebook newsfeed posted something like, I just wish things were back to normal with the church. And I thought, that's the last thing I want. I just, like I hope and pray we have not been through all this pain and suffering over the past several years to go back to how it was before, right? And this sort of brand of American evangelical Christianity that for me, once exposed, looked really unattractive and nothing like what scripture talked about when it comes to being ambassadors for Christ, to loving God, loving our neighbors. And so I really do believe that we are seeing a spiritual reckoning of sorts in this country. And I hope it's not all in vain. The last thing I want is for things to go back to normal. And so there is an excitement and all that too, that as painful as all this is, what will it lead to in the future? Now, I think we see the fighting happening right now, almost like a those that are clinging on to whatever shred they can that is like the old way. They don't want to give it up. And then we see there are others that are happy at this point to allow God to define where are we going from here. And we don't really know, do we? Because everything is up in the air. So I'm more optimistic. I really have written a lot about, and I know it's cliche. We hear a lot in the faith circles about just that that void that we all have, or that God-shaped vacuum. But I really do believe that. I think we are created with this void in our hearts, our souls, that only God can fill, and the gospel can fill. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who is elected. It doesn't matter which political party has an advantage. At some point, if we have not filled that void with Jesus Christ and his life-saving and life-changing gospel, we are going to be left wanting for more. And that's where his followers, Christ's followers, come in. And we're going to have a tremendous opportunity in the aftermath of all of this, we do right now, to trumpet that hope that we have when people are showing up with that emptiness in their lives, their hearts, their souls. That a party couldn't fill it, a platform couldn't fill it, a candidate couldn't fill it. And so at the end of the day, I feel like it's all being stripped away from us, the things that we have built our security on. A lot of, a foundation that's not going to stand.
So last question. So how can listeners follow you, and then anything you have coming up you want to talk about?
Goodness, I don't have any writing projects going on right now. I am in the process of praying about what comes next. And I don't really update my site regularly, but they're welcome to hop over to VickiCourtney.com and they can see what books I've written. I have them all listed there, and links to my resources. And then I'm pretty active on Instagram and hit or miss on Facebook. And I'm one of those silent observers usually on Twitter. I just spend my time liking things, and every now and then I'll retweet something. But those are my little corners that I hang out in right now. And that's where they can learn a little bit more.
Okay, Vicki Courtney, thank you so much for being on the Politics and Protestants Protestants and Politics podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Nat.
This episode was recorded on September 10th of 2020. Also, check out the Protestants and Politics newsletter, and you can support this podcast at my Ko-fi page. Links for both of those are in the podcast description. Thanks for listening.